Hello, Ian. It's lovely to see you on the other side of the Zoom call. One of the things I've actually noticed from COVID is that I'm catching up with people more than I would have without it. So really, I just wanted to get a few sort of ideas from you or insights from you about what the first half of 2020 has been like.
Yes, one thing I've definitely learned from being on all these Zoom calls is that about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my nose goes very red.
What do you think that is?
Well, I don't know, but this is probably the most profound observation yet. Maybe it's whatever it is that it's from sitting all day looking at myself. This is quite a disturbing thing to do, and I don't think it's good for your mental health. So that's my first observation.
Actually, I was reading something about that, and it was saying that for many people, having that little box of themselves, we're not used to looking at ourselves, and our eye gets drawn to it.
I try not to look at it. It's like try not to look at car accidents.
Okay, well, that's the first time that's been mentioned, but I think it's actually highly relevant. Please do continue.
Okay, so what else? So just first, I'll just talk professionally and then personally a bit. So I guess professionally, because I've been involved in a lot of stuff with fires first, and then being head of school at a major university. It's been a sort of every day has been trying to work on pretty bad stuff, actually. So there's been the international students, there's been getting students back, all this administration around sort of shutting places down and trying to operate. It's been pretty interesting, but also I'm getting a bit sick of it, because as soon as you finish one thing, you're on to the next one, and yeah, and everybody's under stress, but you can never actually judge just how stressed they are. And so I have made a few mistakes with sort of not getting that right. But yeah, so I think it's been interesting. The biggest concern for me in my professional realm, there are particular groups who are really in a bad way, and they're in the university sector, of course. I'm fortunate to be in a university that's a bit more resilient than others, but there are groups in there, particularly international students, particularly the ones who are in Australia, the contract staff who are on short-term contract, like postdocs, research fellows. They're just burning time. Their careers are going down the gurgler, basically. The chances of them getting a job in the next 5 years are vanishing. My PhD students are all just finishing, 6 or 8 of them. I just spent yesterday morning, I met with them every morning, and that's the highlight of my day, actually, having a discussion with them. And they're just, they're very concerned, because what are they going to do? Where are they going to go? So that's that side of things. I also find like I'm not keeping up with all the teaching and the research and things like that on the one hand, but on the other hand, I'm getting quite a bit done sitting around all day long in my bedroom. So on a personal level, I have, it's actually been really quite good. I found I'm more content stuck here because there's nothing else to do, and that's really good. Because I'm actually sort of the person who, as you know, can't control myself when it comes to interesting things and opportunities, and then I'm my own worst enemy. Just being here, I can only do so many things, and I can do a bunch of things, new things. We've learned to do quite a bit of swing dancing. We've built an aquaponics system and managed to kill all the fish immediately. What else have we done? I've invented a game that's going to make me famous. Yep. And I play it every morning with my students, because they don't want to. I hear them saying, now we have to do some geomorphology. And they say, no, let's play the game.
So you have to tell me what the game is now.
Yeah, I'll share that with you later on, because it's really good. It's called What's Map. I made that name up. It's amazing. But that whole thing about being sort of unusually contented has made me wonder whether I should commit some sort of crime, so I have to go to prison. Because does that mean if I'm in prison, you'll be really happy because your range of options are restricted? I don't
That's
know.
actually quite profound, because I think a lot of the stress that we experience is because we've got so many options.
Yes, but maybe being in prison is a bit too few options. So maybe we've got a nice balance here. Well,
Maybe.
you can talk to your psychologist about that one. Yeah, and as you say, working on relationships and stuff, with catching up with people. I've actually caught up with stacks of people, just because I haven't been really on Facebook and things, but I'm doing a bit of that, catching up with people. It's good. As far as the future goes, I think you're going to talk about bouncing back from this.
Well, actually, bouncing forward.
Forward, sorry.
Yeah.
Bouncing forward.
Yeah.
Nicely put. So I actually think that a lot of the next few years is going to be spent in defensive activities, is the way I would think of it. I already read the paper this morning that Western Australia, they've decided to take away planning. You don't have to have a planning permit anymore to build a patio on your house. Now, that's just the thin end of the wedge, of course. It starts there, and the next thing you know, you're not going to need, because I do think there's going to be a huge amount of pressure. Bob Catt is already talking about the Bradfield scheme, about building dams, again, about restricting all of the pressure, for example, on the water in the Murray-Darling Basin. There will just be, I think, a swing back the other way to, and we'll see this in every sphere of public life, from I think work-related issues, but particularly in our sphere, in the environmental space. There'll be a lot of pressure to reduce restrictions on anything that's economic, grazing practices. And because we've got a public sector now that's broke, and we'll be paying that off for a generation, we're already not very good at regulatory processes in the environment space. That'll get worse. So I think it's going to be plenty of work for us, but I think kind of depressing work, defending rather than moving forward.
So that is, yeah. Look, it's a pretty grim future, but I can see from what you're saying. For me, it's that thing of, we've all responded globally to COVID because it's been an immediate personal threat, and yet climate change is exactly the same. And the bushfires were really pretty stark in terms of saying, hang on, planet's in trouble. So for you, you're sort of thinking that it's going to actually be even harder to get environmental recognition that we need to do stuff.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of ways to, if you can think about this as, for how many years is it since Australia's been in a recession, with close to 90% of the population in larger urban centres? We're actually divorced from most environmental realities. That's the truth of it. So we're not really exposed often to the sort of tooth and claw of nature. And so how now, with the bushfires and with COVID, which sort of both represent the realities of a frail human state, we could go two ways. One is to recognise that we're part of the planet and part of the system. The other way is to say we've really got to, defend ourselves against nature again. And if you think about our interaction with water and rivers and landscapes, that's really the stark change that happened in our space, where we stopped defending ourselves against natural systems and started to embrace them. So I think that might be sort of an existential choice that we have, and I'm not sure which way we'll go. It could be that we become more, we embrace the realities of climate change, or we actually go the other direction. And the other element of that too is that with the economy so uncertain, the international situation so uncertain, uncertainty tends to breed, I suppose, conservatism, in both politically and in terms of making choices. So I do think it's going to be a challenging decade, probably. for all of this. And why that's important is because it's such an important decade in terms of the progress we have been making over the last few, and the challenges of climate change as well on top of that. Because as I said to you before, that one of the reasons that climate change is so profound in Australia is because we've exploited the continent to such an extent that it's extremely vulnerable to all of these changes, and bushfires are an element of that. The Murray-Darling Basin Plan is that. So we haven't got much leeway at the moment.
So when you, I'm working in environmental flows at the moment with the Commonwealth Environmental Water Office and looking at new research into how we can get even better environmental outcomes from our water delivery. What would it take, do you think, for us to be able to look at something like that in that view of the world going forward, where we continue to embrace the environment?
So environmental flows is a nice example for a few reasons. One is that the regulatory arrangements around environmental water are quite secure. Of pretty well all of the environmental sort of elements, that's one that's it doesn't really matter, or doesn't entirely, but it's more secure. It's harder for the minister to just come and take it because the environment is just another user, another purchaser of water. But I do think in places like cultural water, the opportunities around that, which are emerging at the moment, they'll be much more restricted because there just isn't any water in play. The other thing, what was I going to say? The other thing about environmental water, yeah, it's as the volumes start to decline, then there are it's actually all to do with the details at that point. It's about things like high security water, low security proportions. It's about whether there's any carryover, whether all that machinery of how the system works tend to preference the high security irrigator users actually. So I do think we're going to have to look at how that all operates. When you suddenly have 20% less water, it always comes up as more than 20% hit on the environment. So how do we deal with that? Well, I think this is the fundamental problem of dealing with a non-stationary environmental system when the whole economic system is based on certainty and confidence around a particular proportion of things. How we balance that up, I actually think it's not. Traditionally, we've thought about this as, oh, okay, let's just change the mix slightly. Let's just change I actually think we're going to have to start almost abandoning whole industries. And that's certainly happening in other places where you just don't muck around with some of these sorts of things. You just say, well, that's no longer viable, not just for the environment, but for the sustainability of the whole system. But whether in these restricted times now we're going to make bold choices like that, I don't know.
So what sort of things are you doing to prepare your students so that they can be courageous and deal with ever-increasing uncertainty? I mean, life has always been uncertain, but as we've got more clever and adept, we've believed that we can control things, and we can't. That hasn't actually changed. It's still a really uncertain world. So what are the things that you're doing to sort of build capacity in the students that you influence and teach?
Well, that's a very good question, because in fact, if you look at the way we teach, and I have been reflecting on this lately, we actually teach in a framework of certain uncertainty. So confident uncertainty. So we express uncertainty normally, for example, in a hydrological series, as you know, you get floods and you get droughts, you get it's a statistical property of the series. But now that it's a non-stationary uncertainty. And so how it relates to my students, but it also relates really, I suppose, to all of our business. So you think of, and one of the students we were talking about this today in a class about how do you manage uncertainty in planning if you're doing a catchment management plan. And the traditional way to do that is to say, oh, well, you just got to be aware that things are going to change and you've got to be nimble. But what does that actually mean when nothing is certain? Where the industries themselves that are in your catchment are disappearing, the pace of change, the environment. If nothing is stationary, how can you plan? And it's easy to say, well, we have to plan and we have to be aware of uncertainty. Well, I don't think so. I'm not giving you a very good answer because I don't know it. But I suppose what I would say to my students in that space is go back to your skills. Make sure that you're really good at doing some fundamental things which you can use irrespective of whatever the sort of vicissitudes of the time. And certainly when we can run through all the particular skill sets that there are sort of technical skill sets at the moment, spatial science and statistics and all those sorts of things. But the other ones are the ones that you're particularly adept at, Joanne, about and sort of about sensitivity to the way the people's feelings and and I find myself teaching that sort of stuff more and more. Not that I'm equipped to teach it, because sometimes I pretend to care a bit more than I really do, but but that stuff is fundamental, and getting that all balanced. But in a professional sense, I'm not just talking about emotional intelligence in a sort of vague way, but it's about being a good colleague. I actually, if I was equipping my students for life and this stuff, I would be talking about that sort of stuff just as much, because when I'm employing people, I'm saying, is this person a dickhead? As much as I am saying, are they a super capable researcher and so on. That seems like a pretty pap sort of answer.
Well, no, it doesn't actually, because in most of the people I've talked to, they've all said really, the resilience or the ability of us to cope and possibly even thrive in uncertainty comes back to the networks of people that you're a part of, because it's that shared experience, but also having the confidence to continue to do something, even if there are, mitigating factors against that, if you really believe in something, and having those skills and sharing those skills with others. That's one of the really important things about resilience. So it doesn't actually sound at all different. And I'm delighted that you're becoming such an emotionally aware person, Ian.
Oh, I am, yeah. Just ask my wife, she's astonished.
Well, on the topic of emotion, I'm delighted to hear that you're using creativity through playing games to kick off your meetings. So please tell me more about this game that you're playing.
Well, it doesn't sound very profound, but it is. It's great. It's so I was sitting in a Zoom meeting, looking over somebody's shoulder, and I was looking at a map on the distance in their room, and I'm thinking, what is that map? It had all the colours, I'm trying to work out what the map was, and it turned out to be just a bad map. But it made me think that's actually a pretty good game. It's just giving a person a map with all the different colours on it and saying, what is it? And then you give them clues. And so there are a lot of really wild maps around on the internet. And so now I've got dozens and dozens of these. All my students are all making them up as well now. And so you sort of give clues progressively to work out what the map is. And so it's things like, countries in the world that drive on the left-hand side, and countries in the world that use metric system, and what other ones? The proportion of people in Europe who wash their hands after going to the toilet. So how do you? It's just everything you could imagine, and it's a really fun game.
And so, do people take different turns in the set of clues to the map?
No, I have structured it up so it can be a competitive game, but at the moment they all just collaboratively try to work out what it is, and it's so all the scoring hasn't really worked that well, but
Well, I think that maybe you need to prepare one and we could run it through the River Restoration Centre newsletter. I'd love to do that.
I could actually. It's a lot of fun, and they're really because when you first see the maps, they're bewildering, but you also can look for all sorts of clues. What was one this morning? We was the incidence of melanoma in the world. The other one was the parts of the US where they call it soda and pop.
I love it. I think that's fantastic. Well, I'm going to come back to you on that, because I think that we should offer that game as a way of navigating the two futures that you've painted for us, because either way, I think the What's Map game will assist us in navigating that.
I do think there are opportunities in all of the stuff that's going on at the moment, and just to give an inane example, the reality is, even though this is a grim time for universities, some universities are going to come out of it better than others, just like some airlines might, and there'll be winners and losers across all of that sort of stuff as well. And so I guess I am on the lookout for opportunities, and I don't know what they are yet. So that we'll all have to do that together.
Well, I think that sounds like a great idea, and I will definitely be back in touch. So thank you very much for giving me some time this afternoon.
Thanks, Joanne. Great to talk to you. Talk to you soon.